On this episode of the Ben Greenfield Fitness Podcast.
I was looking for anything and everything I could to get me out of this lifestyle I was in. Most of what I've done, just self-motivation, figuring it out, going to wherever I needed to go to learn whatever I needed to learn, and then just doing it.
You're thinking that everything could be solved with proper diet and proper movement. But unless you have the electrical part of things figured out,
right,
in terms of the actual electrical and frequency structure of the human body as a battery, you're going to fight an uphill battle your entire life.
Health, performance, nutrition, longevity, ancestral living, biohacking, and much more. My name is Ben Greenfield. Welcome to the show.
Hey everybody. Hey, so I'd highly recommend that for today's podcast, you stick around until the very end. Don't leave early, because it gets pretty powerful at the end, in my opinion, at least for me. And I would love to share what happens at the end with you and have you be a part of that. I'm interviewing my dad, Gary Greenfield, on today's podcast, by the way. He is an expert in all things water, but has a pretty deep history in the health industry and just a very interesting past. And honestly, so seldomly do many of us get in touch with our parents later in life, write a letter to our parents, connect with our parents in a deep and meaningful way. And I thought, what better way to do that than to record a conversation with my father and release it to you, and not have it just be some woo-woo, I love you, Dad, I love you, son conversation back and forth, but to instead be chock full of what I hope are really cool, practical, and actionable takeaways for you. I do have one request for you after you listen to today's episode. Think about contacting your own mother or your own father if they still survive, and just talk to them a little bit about how you feel about your childhood. Thank them for taking care of you, for bringing you up. Be grateful to them, right? All gratefulness, no regrets. No regrets about trauma, abuse, anything like that. Just full gratefulness, full love, and full forgiveness. I encourage you to contact your parents. If you need any other, I guess, encouragement to do this, I would also recommend that you go to YouTube and you watch a YouTube video that I will link to in the show notes. The name of that YouTube video is Virgil Clunder Speaks on Gratitude. Extremely powerful. And it's just a very heartwarming story of how the practice of gratitude, and especially the practice of staying connected with your parents and even writing your parents a letter or speaking with them later on in life and in a very deep and meaningful way, can be life-changing for them and for you and for the world and for your legacy. So I will link to that video in the show notes. I'll link to everything that my dad and I talk about in the show notes, and those will just all be at bengreenfieldfitness.com/Gary Greenfield. That's bengreenfieldfitness.com/Gary Greenfield. Now, of course, before we jump into today's show, you do need to take advantage of the 10% discount code that I give all my listeners to the chocolatey, salty, coconutty, mouth-watering goodness that yours truly formulated as a clean way to fuel your body. It's the Keon bar. It's the Keon Clean Energy Bar. It's a long-term, stable source of energy that doesn't cause blood sugar spikes. It doesn't have any chemical cocktail in it. It doesn't have excess protein in it. It does not definitely give you whey protein farts. It's just cocoa nibs and coconut flakes and grass-fed gelatin, organic rice and pea protein, cocoa butter, sea salt. I feel like I'm talking like a phone sex helper. Well, I'm telling you all about this, but it's true. It's so good. It is like a mouth orgasm. You got to try it. It's the Keon Bar. Get Keon.com and use code BGF10 to grab that bar for yourself. This podcast is also brought to you by Organifi.
Now your grandmother, rocking in her rocking chair, 40 years ago, never would have gone to Starbucks to buy a golden milk latte. She would have tenderly blended lemon balm and turkey tail, reishi, a little ginger, a little turmeric, and she would have made from nature a nice, supportive blend for her immune system and her sleep. And yet today we all rush out to the evil coffee shops to get our chemical cocktail of these golden milk elixirs, when in fact Organifi
has produced exactly the real, whole, recognizable food your grandmother would have drank with her golden milk latte, but they've put it in a powder form, so there's no chopping, there's no mess, there's no old school cleanup for you. All you do is put a couple powder scoops in something like a warm glass of almond milk or coconut milk, or if you're on a diet, water. It even tastes good in water. It's called Organifi Gold. Organifi Gold. You get 20% off of this fantastically tasting golden milk elixir if you go to Organifi.com/Ben. That's Organifi with an I.com/Ben and use code BENG20 to get your 20% off. All right, let's go talk with my dad. Remember to talk to your own parents. Remember, all the show notes are at bengreenfieldfitness.com/Gary Greenfield. This episode was recorded in my guest house out in the forest in Washington State. Well, Dad, welcome to the class in the forest.
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's kind of funny. You've been here a lot, and we have never recorded a podcast, even though you were the guy who, who's my first exposure to health and medicine, and even, as we'll probably talk about in the show today, raw foods and strange water concepts people don't know a lot about. So I think it's high time.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm excited to be here, Ben.
Yeah, and honestly, for people listening, part of this too is that, you, the listener, you spend a lot of time listening to me, and, I'll try not to get too emotional on this episode, but, there are, not to use too crass a term, loins that I was derived from.
Yes.
that influenced and created pretty much anything that I ever put out that have touched you guys. And said loins are sitting with me right now. So that might be a funny way to put it, but I mean, it seems like folks should kind of know who you are and where I came from.
Yeah, well, let's do it.
Yeah. All right. So, and then one quick housekeeping piece for everybody listening. I'll put all the show notes for today's show over at bengreenfieldfitness.com/Gary Greenfield, the name of my father, bengreenfieldfitness.com/Gary Greenfield. So, Dad, you have a story, and fortunately, we have time. We're out here in the guest house, far removed from my house, where Jess and the boys are probably creating some smorgasbord for us to dive into after we finish. And I know you came from Miami. You wound up in Idaho.
Yeah.
And now you're in the health world. But how did you wind up in Idaho? How'd that all come to happen?
Yeah. Well, South Florida was the fun and sun capital of the world.
Yeah, Miami.
Miami, and I had a lot of fun, and I was always in the sun, and but eventually that wore out, because along with the fun and the sun came drugs and drinking and carousing and getting into mischief as a teenager. Yeah. And when I was 17 years old, my brother was killed in a gang fight. And he was 16, I was 17.
Greg.
Yeah, Greg. Yeah. And that sobered me up. That made me realize, okay, there's more to life. There's consequences to our behavior. And so I made a decision. I was going to change my life. I was going to straighten out.
Well, before all of that, I mean, you growing up in Miami and just having access to that kind of highfalutin, wealthy lifestyle, your dad, Bill,
yeah,
he was quite the successful entrepreneur himself, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. He was a very good salesman. He was friends with Zig Ziglar, who was, of course, in the same business he was in originally, cookware, selling cookware.
Zig Ziglar.
Yeah. Yeah, and then Zig went from selling cookware to becoming a world-renowned motivational speaker. And your Uncle Bernie was responsible for actually bringing him into the world arena as a motivational speaker. So there's in spite of my troublesome teenage years, my father was a tremendous influence on my life, teaching me positive mental thinking, just to always look for the best in everything, to always think the best, hope the best, believe the best, and to give 100% at everything you do.
I remember that whenever we go down to Miami and visit his office, it was like walking into a motivational speaking museum with posters on the wall, not just Zig Ziglar books, but and I had no clue at the time. Most of that stuff for me just went way over my head. I wasn't really interested in it. I wasn't a Tony Robbins guy. I didn't know who Zig Ziglar was, aside from he had a funny name and he was one of Papa's friends. But I can imagine, you walk into my office now and it's actually somewhat similar. I've got, posters decking the wall with my favorite quotes from all these different motivational speakers, and my sons have access to this vast library now of all these people, Joe Dispenza, and Bruce Lipton, and Tony Robbins, and Zig Ziglar, and and everybody. But I can imagine what it was like growing up in a house like that.
Yeah. My dad was a hard worker. We never saw him during the week, but every Sunday we were out on the boat, fishing, skiing, diving. So I really had quality time with him, I'm really glad that he took the time to take us along. Rather than hanging out with his buddies or whatever and being out there, he'd take his kids along. So it was a good investment.
Well, when you were an adolescent and a teenager, because I always wondered this. I've never really asked you, but obviously I'm kind of wired up to be immersed in physical culture. And I've been that way. I mean, you saw me ever since I was a kid. I just love, even though I was kind of a nerd and played a lot of chess and played the violin and I'd lay in bed and read for hours and hours. I also, when I wasn't doing that, was playing every sport known to man and running all over the hills. And I'm just curious. I've always wanted to ask you this. I know your brother Greg was a stellar, like a professional level athlete, but
he would have been.
He would have been. Yeah. How about you?
I can remember in elementary school jogging, and I didn't have any energy. I couldn't do it. I thought, what's wrong with me? I don't. It's probably my diet. Maybe vaccinations. Probably chiefly diet. I don't know, maybe genetics from my biological parents, who I never knew. But I didn't really get athletic or competitive until junior high school, and then it was all fun. I had absolutely no interest in sports. My brother and I were both in sports. He was always the top stellar athlete in everything he did from the time he was just a little boy. And I was just out there because Mom and Dad wanted me there, and I was just kind of, I just wasn't into it.
Well, you got fit at some point, and I know when you moved to Idaho, and we can talk about this, you wound up delving into a career that involved a great deal of fitness requirements. But I remember when I was still, probably my first 2 years of racing triathlon, we'd race in the pool, and you'd still beat me. Granted, you grew up in water, living in water, but my memories of you when you were at least hanging with me during my adolescent years, playing tennis and swimming and coming out and playing soccer with me and my friends, it seemed like you could hold your own.
Yeah. The older, especially at the fire department. I mean, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a fireman, but I thought I can't do it. I just don't have what it takes, and so I kind of shelved it. But when I did become a fireman and I performed pretty well, that started life. Style of working out and lifting weights and running, I did it because I had to, not because I really loved doing it. Although I did, grow into loving tennis and volleyball and, sports like that. But I wasn't passionate about it.
You were a jock.
Yeah, I wasn't a jock. I knew that if I didn't work out, I didn't want to injure myself on a job, in a fire. I didn't want to, run out of breath, pulling somebody out of a fire or whatever. So I knew I had to work out. I knew I had to be fit. So I stayed that way for the entire time I was, a fireman.
Yeah. Well, backpedaling a little bit. So you said you were 17.
Yeah.
When really the world came crashing down in terms of you realizing that something had to change.
Yeah. I tried for 3 years to change, and I did. I got my act together. I was never into school, but I got into oceanography and I absolutely loved it. And I became an honors student. And
was that before you were 17?
No, I was in college at 17.
Okay.
But during those 3 years, I kind of found my way into the things that interested me. But I was still getting into trouble.
Yeah.
And it was really frustrating. So at the 3-year mark, about 20 years old, I finally decided I got to get out of Florida.
So you're 3 years into oceanography.
Yeah, 3 years. Yeah, general studies and then oceanography, and I went to a couple of different ocean tech programs. One at Jensen Beach, one in Miami, and so I was learning how to be an underwater diver, underwater worker, doing biological sampling, just anything and everything to do with the ocean. And
do you think that's genetic? And I asked that, Dad, because I tell people this. The one thing about living out here in the forest in Spokane, Washington, is I crave water. The happiest I am is when I am immersed in water, when I'm free diving, when I'm spearfishing, when I'm doing open water swimming, when I'm in a triathlon. There's something about me that's magnetically drawn to water.
Yeah, it probably is so, because you've got others. Why aren't you a mountain climber? Why aren't you
and no interest
climbing the cliffs?
Mountains do not attract me, and the ocean does.
Yeah. Same for me. It's just always been water, just in general, has always been an attraction. Yeah.
There's a whole book about that. I interviewed the author of it. It's called Blue Water Deep. I'll find it and put it in the show notes for people listening. It's about the human craving for water. And what water does to your heart rate variability, to your nervous system, to your spleen, a lot of the same properties as meditation or yoga. But I do think some people are even more hardwired to be attracted to certain elements of nature. And I'm a hopeless romantic, so for me, I think there were all the people spread across the planet back in the day, and there were the forest people and the water people and the mountain people and the cave people and somewhere back there, I think we were the water people.
Yeah.
So, what happened when you were 23?
Well, at 20, that's when I decided I had to get out of Florida. I opened up an atlas. We didn't have computers back then. I started reading about different areas of the country, and I read about Idaho. And the phrase that stood out was God's country. And I was godless. I didn't, have any religion. And I thought, God's country, wow, that sounds interesting. I mean, it was kind of naive but
so called Idaho specifically is called God's country.
Yeah, they called it God, and I thought, wow, that's okay. And they talked about the mountains and the lakes. I thought, that's where I'm going. That's it. So I sold all my stuff. I had a Hobie Cat and a surfboard and.
So you didn't know anybody in Idaho?
No, I didn't know anybody. It was just an adventure, and I got on a bus, and but before I got on that bus, like a month before that, I actually found God. It's like I met God, and for me, it was the biggest, most momentous event of my entire life.
What do you mean you found God?
Well, I found Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who represents God. Who God sent to reveal Himself to us.
Was this like fasting, meditation, plant medicine, or was it just happened?
I was at the point. I was looking for anything and everything I could to get me out of this lifestyle I was in. And I did. I went through there happened to be a convention about that same time. I'd already decided to come to Idaho, but I went to this convention, and at it, there was a New Age convention. They had every religion on the face of the earth there. And I went from one booth to the next, and I was kind of an intuitive guy. I'd always been intuitive. And as I talked to each one of these representatives for each one of these booths, I thought, this isn't it. This isn't the way. This isn't what I'm looking for. All I knew, I was looking for God. I thought I was looking for a connection. I think it's just in us because we're made, God created us. And He created us to commune with Him. He created us to know Him and to experience His love and to experience the earth, which is a manifestation of His love. So I just didn't, so that yearning was in me, but I thought, where is He? Who is He? How am I supposed to get to Him? And so
that's not uncommon.
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of people. I know a lot of people are listening. There's like that gnawing in your soul that you fill up with whatever,
Yeah.
CrossFit or alcohol or food or sex or drugs or anything else. And the hole is never filled because human beings are meant to have a deeper spiritual connection than that. And, even recently for me, I felt like a big gnawing hole in my relationship with my kids and with my wife. And only recently did I identify that it was because even though our family was very emotionally connected, we're all physically connected, Jess and I are very sexually connected, there was not a deep spiritual connection. Like we weren't eye gazing. We weren't looking into each other's souls. We weren't considering that not only did we have this Holy Spirit inside us, but we were also spiritual beings walking throughout the Greenfield house all day long, yet we were treating each other as purely physical beings. And once I started to look into my wife's soul and gaze into her eyes, and River and Taryn and I, we eye gaze now before bed at night. We just, I realized it's been like probably 10 years before I've looked deeply into the eyes of my own sons for longer than like 2 minutes.
Wow.
Right. Which is just nuts when you think about it. And the same with my wife, right? Like even, I know we're rabbit holing, but just little things that are way bigger than what you think. Like, we're sitting in bed now for 5 minutes and just eye gazing and seeing each other's soul and seeing each other's spirit. And that it fills that hole somehow, and it's because that's God, right? That God is our spiritual connection. And so I understand when you say that you were looking for something to fill that hole.
And I'd already experienced, I'd read the book of Ecclesiastes, which is the, story of the richest man on the face of the earth, the most powerful man, the most wise man.
That's Solomon?
Solomon, yeah. And he had everything. There was nothing he never had. He had it all. And at the end, he says, all that matters is to know God, to love God, to keep his commandments.
All that matters is love.
Yeah. To love God, to keep his commandments, and to know him. And I read that, and that made, that was probably the single most impactful book I'd read up until that time in my life. And that got me on the right track. But then it's a matter of, realizing our God is a holy God, and he won't accept us in a condition where we are holding on to sin, or ways that aren't healthy. And for me, there were relationships that I had that weren't honorable to God, and I had to let go of those relationships before God would accept me. I had to repent. It's just what Jesus said when he came. What's the first thing Jesus said? He said, "Repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand." And so it's, our God is a holy God. He wants holiness from us, and if we're not willing to do that, then we can't come into his presence.
So you just cut all ties and got on a bus to Idaho.
Yeah, so I got on the bus to Idaho, and when I got to Idaho, by the grace of God, I met all these Christian kids, my age, and so that kept me out of trouble because I didn't know anything from the time I was 11 years old.
What did you do when you got to Idaho?
Well, once I got to Idaho, I got a job, and I met this volunteer fireman who was at the fire department, another Christian guy, and he invited me.
That was in Moscow, right?
Yeah, and he asked if I wanted to become a volunteer fireman. I thought, wow, that's cool, sure. So I moved into the fire department. There, it's a volunteer department. They had 12 student roomers that lived there, and every single one of them was a Christian, which was, for me, it was like great. I had no chance to get back into trouble again because I was just surrounded by all these guys that
way different scene than
Miami. Way different scene than anything I'd ever known in my life. So it was, so for me it was just great, just what I needed because I didn't have the discipline or the wherewithal to, to really say no to a lot of stuff. So that helped me, and from there,
Did you do anything else besides? Did you have random jobs or?
Well, yeah. Well, I got involved with the discipleship program, so I started to get filled up with spiritual information. and that was a 9-month program. And then, I got a side job doing pizza, making pizzas and washing dishes. But at the same time, as I'm working in the fire department, responding to fires and at car accidents, I'm thinking to myself, this is a lot of fun. And to be able to get paid to do this, that would be a dream job. Mm-hmm. And within a year and a half, an opening came up at the Lewiston Fire Department, which is only, for 35 minutes south of Moscow. And
20 if you're me and my brother Isaac were teenagers, and you'd send us to take math classes up there.
Yeah.
We would literally leave the house late and drive like 98 miles an hour to Moscow.
And you never got a ticket.
No, never.
Yeah.
One of us would sit side seat and spot for cops, and the other one would drive. We burned rubber on that road many a time.
Yeah.
So you moved to Lewiston, Idaho, which is where I was born.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, we did a roundabout. We went I got married, and then when I was in Moscow, met your mom. We got married, went to Florida, and ended up coming back to Lewiston when I found out about the job. And so that started a career in fire and EMS services that lasted 18 years.
So you met Mom in Moscow.
Right.
And then you all moved back to Florida, back to like your parents, or what happened?
Well, we got married, and I decided our honeymoon was going to be driving back to Florida so that Pat could meet Mom and Dad.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. And at the time, still I wasn't sure what I wanted to be. I was thinking, maybe I'll just continue with the undersea diving because I wanted to do something adventuresome. But then I started to consider the concept. It's one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Undersea welding and working. And I thought, I don't think so. If I'm going to be married and have kids, that's not where I want to be. So, the other option was firefighting. So that's when I started to, look for jobs, and this one opened up here in Idaho again. So it was just another rewind, from another exciting adventure coming back to Idaho.
Yeah. So you, at that point, were married to Mom, working as a firefighter in Lewiston, Idaho.
Yes.
Okay. And when I was born, I have my older brother Isaac. He's 3 years older than me. And then I was born, and for the majority of my childhood, that's what I remember. You were working as a firefighter.
Yeah.
Now, what was that like for you physically? Like in terms of going from, liking adventure but not being super physically active to needing to go through the rigors of firefighting, and how'd you do? And the reason I asked that, honestly, Dad, is just out of pure selfishness, because I look at my arms and my legs and my hand, and like I'm you, like I have the same. Maybe
I know we run the same way.
I've got a little bit of Mom's side with the huge, broad, bony shoulders, but I'm primarily you, and I'm just curious how you fared physically as a firefighter.
I did fine. Preparing for the job, I started, running and doing. I wasn't working out. I was working out with doing pull-ups and push-ups and sit-ups and running. Because I wasn't at the time. I don't think I'd ever been in a gym. This was back in the 70s, and so I surprised myself because I came in. I were 250 applicants, 250. People taking the test, and they weeded out. The first were weeded out for the written test, and I came out number one. Then they weeded out for the physical strength, balance, or strength, agility, and endurance, and I came in number one on all those. And for me, it's like, whoa, wow, I can't believe I just did this, but I did. And then there was the interview, and I passed that with flying colors, and I got the job.
I've had my genes tested, and I have the majority of like my basically my muscle fiber composition genes from your side, and they dictate like this combination of power and endurance.
Yeah.
It's a power endurance profile is what it is. It's about 16 different genetic SNPs that look at everything from mitochondrial density to fast twitch, slow twitch, muscle fiber composition, blood flow, antioxidant capacity, and basically it's kind of like the Batman gene, meaning like you're good at a whole range of physical tasks like power and speed, and you're never going to be, or you would have to work very, very hard to be professional at any of them. Right. But able to perform, which is probably why I've bounced around from bodybuilding to triathlon to, tennis and obstacle course racing and all this stuff. But, you probably have a similar genetic profile in that you were able to perform across a wide variety of tasks in firefighting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you were at the Lewiston Fire Department, and obviously at some point you weren't. And
right.
From what I recollect, you moved on from that to start your own medical-oriented company.
Yeah, I'm also wired. There's three words I think of: efficiency, effectiveness, and economy. And I was working for a government operation, and I didn't see any of that there. And it was really frustrating for me. I thought, is this really where I want to spend the rest of my life, just being kind of held back or not being able to really do everything I want to do? And and I realized the guys I was working with, it was all about. I mean, it was a great job. 20 years, you could retire like in the military.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to work hard. It was a nice job, cush job.
And you were also were you an EMT or a paramedic?
Yeah, I was an EMT. At that time, we didn't have paramedics back then. They came on later, at least in our town. I don't know what it was like in big cities. I can't remember. But so I thought, this isn't how I want to spend the rest of my life. I want to do something more than just exist in this job and make a paycheck and go home and look forward to retirement. So and I had that entrepreneurial blood in me from probably just the inspiration of my father.
Yeah.
And I thought, I can do this job. I can do this service better. I can improve on it. So I started my own business from ground, with nothing. I used I used my retirement, my IRA, to buy my first ambulance out of a junkyard.
I remember that ambulance.
And I fixed, it's like I restored it to pristine condition, and I had to get licensed from the state, had to get certifications for all my EMTs, and so we did it, and went from zero, and I thought, okay, I can't quit my fireman job until this is supporting us. And I started in, I think it was September. By January, I was making more money than I was at the fire department.
And this was just basically a fleet of ambulances that you
one.
Built up from the ground from just one that you got at a junkyard. You hired a bunch of EMTs, and you were basically transporting patients from like hospice to hospital to nursing home, like non-emergency medical transport.
Right. So I went from 0 to 95% of the business within, 4 years. And then I started putting my sights on the emergency services because we had the experience behind us. We had all the certifications, and I thought my guys are, this is what they're trained to do.
Yeah.
So why not? Well, that was idealistic in the sense that I was up against a formidable foe with the firefighters union. When they saw that I'd taken 95% of the transfers, and now I was going after EMS. And they knew I could like outmaneuver them. We were just more agile. It was a private company.
Yeah.
We could figure out how to do it. And so that's when the crap hit the fan, and man, it became all-out war.
I remember that because we'd go to Albertsons to rent a movie or buy some milk or whatever, and we'd see firefighters who you used to work with at the Lewiston Fire Department. They'd give us just the stink eye, and it was almost like there was this rivalry going on in town between between Gary and his non-emergency ambulances that he's taking emergency, and then the local government-run fire department.
Yeah, and then I started, I took over a volunteer fire department that had gone defunct and started offering fire protection to the county, which didn't have any, and the city didn't want to provide it. So I thought, well, if they're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. So we started, so I had a private fire department, a private ambulance service, and I was the administrator of the fire service. And, things were going well, but then the city decided, well, we want to get into the county. So it's like they saw what I was doing, and it motivated them to really kick into high gear and start, going after all this business. So, it was good for competition's good, right? It created, a higher standard of care and a higher standard of performance and service for the city and for the county. But then there was another factor dealing with Medicare. Most of our funding, it was a great income generator, but most of our money came from Medicaid and Medicare. And dealing with the government, it was something I couldn't do anything about that.
Trust me, I know, Dad.
Yeah.
Because do you remember how I saved up for for spending money on anything, I would get up at like 4 a.m. You trained me how to do all the insurance billing.
Yeah.
So for 3 years, I was like, what was I, like 13 years old?
Yeah, you were young.
That's how I learned to like type 1,000,000 miles an hour. It's how I learned to just like navigate my way through computers. Because, eventually you guys hired me like a guy who taught me computer programming.
Yes.
This isn't a story about me, but, I was going to be a video game designer and I had an internship with a Microsoft programmer. But like my first experience with computers was I was doing all the Medicare, all the Medicaid coding. And that was also, all of that was my first experience with health. Because I don't know if you remember this, but you used to take me to all these health conferences and I'd see dudes impaled on forklifts and, guys with their arms shoved through meat grinders and, every emergency situation known to man.
Yeah.
I'd follow on the ambulance. I remember like the EMTs, we'd come to visit you at the station across the river in Clarkson, Washington. And I'd have like EMTs chasing me around to stick me with an IV to practice the IV. Like I was deep into a lot of this stuff. And I think that partially shaped my own interest in health and medicine later on in life when I said I didn't want to be a computer programmer, and I kind of shifted into fitness. But then in my immersion in fitness, I kind of renewed that interest in medicine and health. But that was all while you were doing the firefighting and the non-emergency ambulance stuff. Like I got exposed to a lot of that at an early age. Even remember when you'd take us to the nursing homes and we do BP measurements on like long lines of nursing home residents, as they're eating their mashed potatoes and peas and gravy, and then they'd come out and me and my brother Isaac and we do their blood pressure measurements. Like, I tagged along to all that stuff.
Yeah. Huh.
Hey, I want to interrupt today's show to get your mouth watering. Did you know that there is a company that makes pouches with things like non-GMO almond butter, organic coconut butter, which in my opinion is even better than almond butter, and you're missing out on an important part of life if you've never actually had organic coconut butter straight out of the pouch. They've also got cashew butter, they've got peanut butter, they have all forms of nut butter, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other SKUs that are all completely guilt-free. It's Thrive Market. Thrive Market is an online marketplace for everything from non-GMO food, snacks, vitamins, supplements, personal care products, eco-friendly cleaning supplies, safe and non-toxic beauty products, kitchen staples, home goods, organic baby food, kids products, and did I mention nut butter? It's all shipped straight to your door. No Costco, no Whole Foods, but a perfect blend of both. It's just like an online membership-based grocery store where you save a ton of money, even more than what you'd save on something like Amazon, and a ton of the things in their catalog you can't get on Amazon anyways. So here's the deal. Everything is already marked down at Thrive Market, but then they're going to knock off of their already 25 to 50% off prices an extra 25% off your order plus a free 30-day trial. You just go to thrivemarket.com/Ben. That's 25% off your first order, free 30-day trial, thrivemarket.com/Ben. This is a fun, mouth-watering website to surf, and definitely grab you some of that coconut butter. If you don't get anything else, get coconut butter, a giant box of it sent to your garage. This podcast is also brought to you by something that blocks your eyes from being destroyed by the bright screens they're often bombarded with for 11 to 12 hours every single day, whether that's your iPhone or your Samsung or your work computer or scrolling through social media or Netflix or the LED lights at your mall or your grocery store. The majority of us live with tired, dry eyes, blurry vision, or headaches caused by screens. And if that sounds familiar to you, then you need to filter out that high energy blue light and eliminate the glare coming from your daily barrage of screens. Well, the Felix Gray blue light blocking glasses, which come in high-end designer frames like organic Italian acetate and German engineered steel, filter out 90% of high-energy blue light and 99% of glare coming from your daily barrage of screens. They got non-prescription, they got prescription, they got reading glasses, they got adult sizes. They even have kids sizes for the young person in your life who might be looking at a screen at night. Heard that might happen. Anyways, my kids wear blue light blockers at night, I should mention. Felix Gray, they're going to give you free shipping and 30 days of risk-free returns or exchanges. You just go to felixgrayglasses.com/Greenfield. That's Felix, F-E-L-I-X, felixgrayglasses.com/Greenfield, and grab you some of these sexy blue light blocking glasses.
So eventually, though, the competition from basically like the well-funded local government firefighting institutions and medical institutions force you to move on from firefighting and ambulance?
Yeah, I lost interest. It's like I'd been there, done that. I accomplished my goal, and I thought, it just wasn't fun anymore. It was the challenge. All of the regulations kind of took the wind out of my sails. And so, I decided to get out. And during that time, I also started. So then I thought, well, I'd started a dispatching service that, for the ambulance service, but also just for an answering service, dispatch service for the community.
And for people who don't know what that is, what's a dispatching service?
Yeah, well, back then we didn't have cell phones. We had pagers. All the doctors would wear pagers, and service people would wear pagers, so that if they got a call after hours, they could get the call would come into a central phone center, and then that dispatcher would dispatch out a message to the doctor or the service.
Yeah, your kids would wear pagers. Remember that?
Yeah,
all of us, we look like little druggies. Like everybody thought we were like the little homeschooled drug dealers, when really it was just so our parents could keep tabs on us and tell us to pick up milk or oatmeal on the way home.
Yeah, so we took advantage of it, and actually it was it was one of the first computerized networking systems, at least in Idaho. And so then I thought, to build up my business, I've got to go out and market and find customers. But rather than do that, I thought I'm going to buy the competition. And so I was ready to buy the competition. He said, well, I want to see what you got, who am I selling my customers to? And when he came over and looked at our operation, he said, I don't want to sell, I want to buy you out. I thought, okay. So I sold it, and then went on to other things.
So what was next?
Well, during the interim, there was a short stint building aluminum welded jet boats, and that wasn't my choice. That was a good friend who I was trying to help out, and I ended up going.
Yeah, I remember that Phantom jet boats. I was the janitor in the warehouse.
Yeah.
Me and Isaac, we'd be down there sweeping.
Yeah, you guys are always involved in the family businesses, So but that just wasn't my passion. So I lasted 6 months and got out of that, and from there, then eventually I got into coffee. I thought, I want to do something that's not going to have any interaction with the government. Minimal amount of regulations where I can just grow a business and have customers that enjoy. And
I never quite asked you about or understood that transition, because I remember, I think it was our friends, the Tuckers in Lewiston. They had like a coffee shop. Blackbird Java.
That was after.
Was that after? Okay.
Yeah, that was after.
Why coffee? Like what was the?
Yeah.
Because I don't remember you being super into coffee.
No, I wasn't.
Up until that point.
Your mom and I had always talked about having a coffee shop just for something fun, and that was the path to the coffee shop, to the coffee house. Just learning. I thought that's simple. I can bring the roaster, put it into my shop that I built on the property, and just start roasting. And I found I loved it. Absolutely loved. It was like I found I really enjoyed food and beverage, and that that aspect of being a chef kind of came out in creating the perfect coffee roast.
It was weird for me because as a kid, I would wake up, I would open the window, and all I could smell was green coffee beans roasting. You built this huge shed out in our driveway, but really nice shed, almost like an actual coffee shop.
Yeah.
With this green and gold high-end deluxe Dietrich coffee roaster that I think you got in Sandpoint.
Yeah.
And these giant trucks would show up in our driveway, way out in the sticks and the hills in Idaho, and drop off these bags from South America and Guatemala and Colombia and Costa Rica and Tanzania. And I would go out there, and you'd just have stacks and stacks of books about the chemistry of roasting and how, we'll probably talk about this, how water affects the espresso machine and the coffee and, barista. And I remember you and my little brother Zach started traveling around all these coffee conventions and barista competitions where you flip the espresso handles and syrup bottles. But it was kind of weird. It was you didn't seem to have at that point a normal job.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was more just learning on the job. For me, most of what I've done, from that point on anyways, even with the ambulance, it was just self-motivation, figuring it out, going to wherever I needed to go to learn whatever I needed to learn, and then just doing it. And so that's basically how I got into coffee.
That was Greenfield Coffee.
Yeah, Greenfield Coffee. Yeah.
Were you? Because I know you did a great deal of going to coffee conventions and being taught the chemistry of coffee,
yes,
coffee roasting and coffee making and espresso. And I was at Paul Check's house a couple of weeks ago, and he was walking me through all the science of making the perfect espresso shot.
Uh-huh.
He told me, he said something like, most people don't know this, but it's I think he said, the 24 to 28 seconds, and he showed me everything. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. Because I knew all that stuff when I was like 13. Basically making myself basically not oblivious, but I was resistant to the effects of caffeine probably by the time I was 14 because I just drank espresso all day long.
Yeah, I
and
probably
loved
had
it.
you out there testing it. Yeah,
you did. But the thing I was going to ask you was just a broader big picture question, because I've also wondered this about myself. I'm a voracious learner. Like, you've seen my library in the house, and I'll just get stuck on a topic and just buy every book on the planet and follow every Twitter account that exists for that topic and just go deep. And I remember you having a lot of books. Like, I remember you having that big roll-up desk in your library and the big bookshelf and all the books. Kind of like
the one
Papa
that
had
collapsed
a lot of
because
books.
it had so many books on it.
Yeah, the one that collapsed because you had so many books on it. I learned a lesson. My bookshelves are solid inside. River and Tarrant are going to be okay.
Yeah.
But were you always a reader? Were you always a learner?
Not in school, for sure, but I didn't fit in. But yeah, I mean, when I got into a topic, I went in whole hog. Whether that was the Christian faith. I mean, I became a pastor. And I studied.
That's right.
Yeah, I was a pastor for 10 years.
Remember, you were doing that on the side while you were firefighting and everything else.
Yeah, it's like I saw that as I got to make money as a firefighter, but I could read. So yeah, as a matter of fact, the guys would be watching TV and I'd be reading books. So I was constantly reading.
Would you be like there in the fire station planning what you were going to say in a Sunday sermon?
Oh, sure, yeah. And then I'd get a fireman to come in for me so I could go, to church on Sunday and teach. And
so you'd go preach and then just go back to the fire station?
Yeah. So, and all my downtime was spent reading.
Yeah.
For that. And then when I got into coffee, it was the same thing. When I got into nutrition and water, it was the same thing. So, we're similar.
Yeah. So Greenfield Coffee, how many years were you roasting and selling coffee beans to, from what I remember, you're selling to local coffee shops. I think you started to do a little bit online, because I remember you hired me to create the website at one point.
Yeah, at the end.
Your little coding son.
Yeah. It was mostly just, area restaurants and espresso places and, and then our own places, we had drive-through, started with the espresso stand at the airport and then did a drive-through and then and that was all planned so that because I didn't know anything about running a food and beverage business.
That's right. I forgot you had a coffee shop at the airport.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was another one of my first jobs, was working. I didn't work the airport coffee shop. I worked all your coffee stands up in Moscow, because by that point I was going to college in Moscow. And actually, it was even before that. I was taking classes, because I was homeschooled, and you had me taking some classes from tutors in Moscow.
Right.
But I'd go up there early and work at your coffee shop in Moscow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long was it that you just ran strictly coffee?
From 97 until 2007. So 10 years.
Was that your initial exposure to really the whole nutrition, chemistry, water, food world?
Yes. Absolutely. But not. I was still on the standard American diet, with not cognizant of organic. As a matter of fact, I would have customers come in and ask for organic coffees, and I would just look at them like, well, why does that matter? What's that's yeah. So I had no concept of the relationship between nutrition and pesticides and all this stuff. It was still just completely off the radar for me until 2005, and that's when there was probably the most significant events in my life it was the most significant event regarding nutrition and becoming aware that, wow, there's something to food that, we used to have kids over all the time, right, for dinner on Sundays.
I remember that.
Yeah, the college kids.
Not just on Sundays.
Yeah, well,
like our
actually
house,
every
between
day,
mom
right?
being a hairstylist and having people come over for haircuts all day long,
Yeah.
between the fact that we were like the family to hang out with in the local homeschooling community. So like every kid was at our house playing in our pool and on our tennis court and just playing on our acreage all day long.
Yeah.
And then you guys would throw these massive house parties every single Sunday.
Yeah.
So we'd have like 20 college students over every Sunday. Like I tell people I'm introverted. But I grew up in a house that was basically a zoo 7 days a week.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the girls we had over shared with us at the table that her mom was cured of cancer from a raw food diet. And I was astounded. I thought, what in the world? How can that be? And that was what set me on my quest to then just dive whole hog into understanding nutrition and natural health and eventually water.
And that was weird for me because, our diet growing up, was largely comprised of, we did a lot of fast food. I remember you'd take me on my Burger King dates and remember the McDonald's Big Breakfast. You'd take me to the McDonald's Big Breakfast and I'd have the hash browns. And remember the platter with the hash browns and the orange juice. And then we did, after all of our baseball games, you'd always take us to Dairy Queen for the blizzards.
Oh, yeah.
The blizzards. And then, of course, Burger King and the Whoppers. That was one of our favorites.
Yeah.
But, we hit every fast food restaurant on 21st Street in Lewiston. Like, that was our life.
That's right.
And then Mom, of course, would bring us and any of our friends in the Suburban down to McDonald's on 29-cent cheeseburger, 29-cent hamburger, 39-cent cheeseburger day, and literally bring back bags and bags and bags of grease-soaked paper from McDonald's and stock the fridge. We did. I remember all this because, like, right now, we're in discussions at Keon right now about, okay, how can we create healthy versions of comfort foods? And I'm like one of the biggest idea men there because there were so many. There were so many that we subsisted on. The take and bake pizzas from Papa Murphy's.
Oh, yeah.
We did the tons of cereal. I remember I would do
big
like
bags of cereal.
3 or 4 peanut butter Captain Crunch bowls a morning. So it was standard American diet. So for me,
absolutely, 100%.
it was full on freaky weird when I saw my dad start doing things like making crackers. And I remember you'd like come over to the house and you'd have like ferments, this stuff that just I had no clue what it even was. Like sprouts and ferments. And I was at the time, by that point, this was 2005, right?
Yeah, 2005, 2006.
Okay, so this was a year or two into my marriage with Jessa.
Yeah, right.
And Jessa, although she came from a ranching farming background, she grew up dirt poor making food from scratch. So even though we weren't doing a lot of fast food and junk food, we were doing a lot of kind of like American farmer scratch food, right?
Yeah.
So we were doing just basically flour biscuits and, whatever meat was on sale that we could make some kind of a dish out of, and, some fish and whatever produce we could afford. And we grew a lot of our produce, but we weren't organic. We weren't raw. We weren't fermented.
Right.
The only reason we started doing any of that was Jessa used to have horrible acne and eczema, and she came home from the University of Idaho library one day with this book called The Dietary Cure for Acne by Lauren Cordain, who is like the godfather of the paleo diet. Yeah. And that was my first introduction, her first introduction into how food can heal the body. But it was around that same time when I'm starting to, I think Rob Wolf had just launched his podcast, and so I was starting to listen to Rob Wolf a little bit. I had just started my podcast at the same time, which had nothing to do with nutrition. It was just all about fitness.
Right.
And then you were getting into raw food, and I just remember it being really weird because even though I was starting to get into food a little bit and how it can heal the body, that like you were full on like one of the folks walking around Airwana, LA, like just on a totally different level than just like eat healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the $30 jars of fermented coconut yogurt with unicorn tears sprinkled, bottled under a full moon. So you got into raw food, and what happened after that?
Well, from there it went to general nutrition. Was researching every kind of raw food, every kind of medical, just essential oils. Every kind of medical treatment that was natural.
Oregano.
Yeah,
oregano. You got me into oregano. You turned me onto oregano, which I eventually, I took that over. Keon still sells oregano now. You were my first. I think you also wrote I don't remember why. I think it was a deal where you didn't want your name published or something like that at the time, but you have a guest article on my website from way back in 2007 about oregano. I think you called yourself your middle name Alan or something like
funny.
that. But and you actually, so at the same time Jessa was exposing me to this whole ancestral nutrition side of things, you were exposing me to largely what I think a lot of people would consider to be the woo side of things, like frequencies, crystals, essential oils, water, a lot of this other stuff that I'd never heard of before. Yeah. So you weren't doing this as a business, though.
No, although I was selling. Eventually, I had a friend who I was learning that I had met who had an oregano oil business, and he was leaving the country. So just for fun, I took it because it was just a small business. It was easy to. And so that got me into essential oils big time, and I started going to some conferences and doing research and learning everything I could about essential oils. And and eventually I sold that business and got into water.
How'd you get into water? What was it that got you interested?
Well, first it was a book by Victor Schauberger, and then a number of books by about Victor Schauberger.
Yeah, he's the Austrian. He's like a naturalist,
naturalist, visionary.
Yeah,
self-educated. Didn't go to college, but he came from generations and generations.
I'm writing a note to myself right now because I'll put a link to some of his stuff in the show notes. He's got some very interesting work.
Yeah, very interesting. And so then somebody invited me to this Kangen water demonstration. I had no idea what a Kangen machine was. I didn't know what ionization was. And I went to the presentation, and I was still 24/7 into studying nutrition, natural alternatives, and nature, and so I watched them, put on this presentation. It was pretty impressive. But I looked at the machine. I thought, well, they're using electricity. And they're claiming that they're making water, they're making water the best it can be. And I thought, we can't outdo nature. That there's got to be a way to do this without a gadget, without a machine that brings water back to its natural state. So
versus like a water alkalizer, or a Kangen or any of these type of machines.
Yeah, it's like every machine out there, what they do what the body does, but they're doing it before it gets to the body, really. That's an H2 generator. The body breaks down the H2O and separates out the oxygen and creates chlorine and creates ozone
or the new deuterium depleted water idea through beta oxidation. Like your body, if you're limiting starches and sugars and processed carbohydrates, your body actually generates its own deuterium depleted water. And if you're also avoiding deuterium isotopes, which come from plants that have been sprayed with pesticides and herbicides, that combined with carbohydrate mitigation kind of saves you from having to, well, I shouldn't say it saves you. What it does is it allows your body to limit the amount of this heavy isotope that displaces hydrogen. So you're getting deuterium depleted water in your body. But what I found is that in many people, because you can test now your deuterium levels, and they're so high, many people actually have to drink this so-called light water, this deuterium depleted water that's now coming out of Austria and Germany and Russia, and now being imported into the U.S. But I believe that in the same way that if you eliminate things like dairy and grains from your diet temporarily, your gut heals, then you can reintroduce those type of foods. I think if you're depleted in deuterium, you can limit deuterium and even drink deuterium depleted water for some time, but it might not be something you have to do your entire life.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it's just, our diet is so imbalanced now because of all the contaminants that. Yeah, so it's really a challenge to keep it in balance with just, by natural processes.
Yeah, so you were looking at these water filters, you're getting interested in water.
Yeah. And
what'd you do from there?
Well, from there, I was introduced when I traveled to Korea and met with actually he was a professor of I think molecular biology who was into water, and he got into water because his daughter had a disease that was incurable, and he figured out how to use energy, EMF, from minerals to get into the water and use that to cure her, or at least to help her so she could,
when you say
function.
EMF, that's a flag, red flag for many people.
Yeah, well, that's it's kind of like the EMF, spectrum. When you look at a spectrum on the EMF, what do you see? You don't see anything natural in there. It's all man-made stuff. I mean, from radio waves to alpha gamma, it's all man-made. Where all of that came from nature. We're just corrupting it. We're just
taking non-native EMF, but a lot of people don't realize native EMF. Grounding, earthing, sunlight, even like machines that generate pulsed electromagnetic fields, certain frequencies, and there are companies like Essential Oil Wizardry that expose their actual bottles to frequency generators that are generating native EMF that bombard oil, because oil can carry that signature, water can carry a signature if it's exposed to those frequencies as well. So when you say EMF, you're referring to native EMF,
natural, native or natural EMF.
So that's what this guy was doing. He was basically exposing water to natural EMF.
Right, using minerals. And so my quest was to figure out how to create a device that was non-sacrificial in nature, that would, like a free energy device, that would impart into water beneficial energies in a way that didn't require any kind of adjunct equipment or plugging into the wall.
Without requiring electricity.
Yeah, without requiring man-made electricity, because of course electricity is
true. Okay, so basically we're talking about figuring out how to modify water to cause it to vibrate or oscillate, the water atoms to vibrate or oscillate at a frequency similar to what you find in nature without the use of electricity.
Right, using natural means. And because the problem with water today is that it's bypassing all the natural parts of the cycle that structure that water, that energize that water, that bring it into a natural state where it's free of contaminants energetically and physically, and where it's got a rich array of not only physical minerals but also energetics. Energetic or native EMF.
Which forms the exclusion zone in water, which I've talked with Dr. Thomas Cowan about, and I've talked with Dr. Gerald Pollack about. I want you to feel the pressure to delve into the science. I've talked with Dr. Robert Slovak about it, about how you can create an electrical charge within water that, very similar to a plant, allows water to pass through a vessel with less obstruction, which allows it to create in the aqueous matrix surrounding a cell a higher electrical charge, and that also allows it to basically get exposed to things like sunlight, protons within the body, etc., and interact with those because of the actual charge that the water contains, versus a lower charged water that would be comprised primarily of H2O bonds versus H3O and a large number of these exclusion zones that guys like Dr. Gerald Pollack have studied in his lab at the University of Washington.
Yeah, so, well, for instance, when you work out, what is it that buffs you up?
That buffs you up?
Yeah, what is it that gives you the structure, the mass, and even the strength,
muscle fibers?
Movement. Well, yeah, but what's acting on the muscle fibers? The water molecules that surround it.
Right.
So what's happening to those water molecules when you're working out? It's movement, right? Correct movement has an impact on it changes the molecular angulation of the water molecules, and then you combine nutrients with that, which is energy. And what is it? The water absorbs those energies. It doesn't absorb so much the physical component is there to carry the energy, the information, and that's what your water cells absorb, what your water molecules absorb, and that's what buffs you up. That's simple.
And that also serves as almost like a charge capacitor.
Yeah.
In terms of taking not just movement, right, physical oscillations that can produce, essentially, when you're looking at water, it's a crystalline structure. Right. So you're talking about piezoelectricity from the movement. Mm-hmm. You're talking about light and proton based movement from infrared light or sunlight, if you're being exposed to that while you're moving. And then you could also say the actual minerals within the body would affect that as well.
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, there's a common, I mean, you know, it's a mix of energetics and physical actions. Energetic actions, which can create a physical action, but also physical actions that can draw in or absorb or attract an energetic benefit. For instance, water physically, when in nature, it's always going back and forth like this. It's like an oscillation. You know, it's a left-right movement.
Right. For people
centrifular.
listening, he's moving his hand like a fish. So it's almost like an underground stream, for example, with the water tumbling over the rocks.
Yeah, or even if you look on the earth of any streams, they're going to be just extreme left-right turns. It's just like squiggly.
Right.
You know, and that's what water does naturally, because that's what creates the structure. When you increase the angular structure of the molecule bonding, you're expanding the water's ability to absorb energy, because it's all about, you know, that's what it's all about. It's about the water bringing in information or energy and storing it, and then taking it into a plant, animal, or person, or into the environment to release that energy.
Right. And that's what so many people, and I want to get back to what you did, you know, when you decided to figure out a way to create that charge within water without the use of electricity. But that's what so many people still shockingly fail to wrap their heads around when they're low on energy or have poor metabolic or mitochondrial function, is just this whole idea of, you know, as Robert Becker in his book, The Body Electric, refers to it, the body being a human battery.
Yeah.
Right. If you want to be healthy, then eating vegetables and exercising is nowhere near as important as sunlight, minerals, water, grounding, earthing, right, and exposure to, and this is one that I get thrown to the bus for a lot, but it's true, exposure to the proper frequencies of energy, and that includes positive emotions and relationships, right, and being with other people. Like sure, those, that is the key to health. It is not moving and nutrition, which is how I spent the first 2 decades of my existence in the fitness sector, thinking that everybody or everything could be solved with proper diet and proper movement. Mm-hmm. But unless you have the electrical part of things figured out, you right, know, in terms of the actual electrical and frequency structure of the human body as a battery, you're going to fight an uphill battle your entire life. So I'm going to get off my soapbox and go back to the minerals. So you're trying to figure out how you can create this filter.
Yeah, well, and actually it's not even it was how to create water that could absorb as much energy as possible to benefit primarily, our focus was on plants and animals. And because it's a lot easier to work with plants and animals than with people, on multiple levels. So we just started. One of the most simple experiments I did was in with the kitchen sink, where I took water just out of the tap and filled up a cup that had soil in it, and I had like 5 cups of soil, and one had tap water, one had structured water, the water that had been vortexed, one had water that had been vortexed with specific energies, which means that, and all I did was wrap the vortex unit with minerals on the outside, never touched the water. Then I had one where it went through the minerals and the vortex. I put them out in cups outside and just watched to see what happened. Every single one of those cups had a different dynamic within the soil. Everything from growing some kind of chalky substance to one being extremely wet, another one being dry. Every one of them had a different response. Which told me that there was something. It was not only the vortexing that was having an impact, but it was these invisible energies that never even touched the water, that was like light being absorbed into the water.
You have pictures. There's an ebook on your website. That I actually was looking through it prior to our interview because I wanted to see what kind of resources were on your website for people. And you have a picture of these jars, the water clarity.
Well, that's another one. Well, that's another one I did where I just took tap water and then I took water that was structured with the mineral component, and just to see how would it react with rice in a jar. So those jars had rice. Each one jar had rice and water. And one was structured water, one wasn't, and we just wanted to see what would happen. And the structured water stayed crystal clear with the rice in it, and the other jar was, was very murky.
Yeah, it's very cloudy. Yeah, it looks like dirty water.
Yeah, but I spent years doing so many just simple experiments, apart from just even working with plants and animals. But, I've been working with plants and animals and doing these experiments for almost a decade now. And, it's like,
I remember
know
one
exactly
day you
what's going
came
on.
back, because I was still trying to figure out what you were doing, because even when you were into this, I hadn't read the body electric. I didn't understand frequencies or energy or the impact on the body at all. So for me at this time, what you were doing was really weird.
Yeah, I know.
But I remember you came back, wasn't it India or some other country you went to where you were actually feeding livestock? Or not feeding, but allowing livestock to drink structured water?
Well, we did a lot of work in India because India, there's lots of farmers. The farms are small, and it was easy to work there. We worked, for instance, there was a calf on one of the farms we were working at, and the calf was just drinking water out of the well, and the calf was very antisocial, very skittish, didn't want to be around people, and they started to give it structured water, and its whole personality changed. It all of a sudden became very social, very at peace, and I saw the same thing happen with chickens, where we did a side-by-side, 2 barns. One got the bore well water, and one got the structured water. And the chicken farmer didn't know that chickens could have a temperament that was peaceful. He always saw chickens that were extremely agitated and had a mottled look to them, not a healthy look. And when he could compare it to the chickens that had the structured water, it's like he couldn't believe the difference. In that these chickens were very peaceful. They looked great. They gained more weight. They ate less food. They were healthier.
And the water was not filtered differently.
No.
It was just structured because there's a difference, right? So could you still have water that is structured but contains chlorine, fluoride, pesticides, birth control pills, all the things that we find in our normal water supply?
Sure, but there's an energetic filtration going on. When you expose these energies, their energies are designed to do 3 things: clean, feed, and protect. When I say energies, I mean electromagnetic frequencies that emanate from any natural substance. And they all fulfill that role. For instance, like with chlorine, I always wondered when we used a structured water unit in a pool, the odor would dissipate from the chlorine. That was very strong. The red eyes would dissipate. The people that were allergic to chlorine that got red skin, it wouldn't get red anymore. And I always wondered what's going on. What are we doing in that chlorine? Because the chlorine was still there. You'd measure, and what I think was happening was just changing. It was literally breaking down in that industrial created chlorine to a more pure state of chlorine that wasn't toxic.
Right. Then the gas would dissipate.
Chloride.
The gas would dissipate more readily off the surface of the water if that were the case.
Yeah. So I know we were, and I think there's a number of things. For instance, even with I took sewage water from a lake in Bangalore. In the middle of Bangalore, there's 25 million people.
It's a pleasant experiment.
Yeah. Well, and it was fed by the water treatment plants that had supposedly treated the water, and it was treated, but it still had fecal matter in it, and it stunk. It was pretty bad. And I took that water. I took 2 gallons, put it into a plastic bucket, and dropped one of my simple handheld structuring devices in it with a harmonizer, and put a little aquarium pump in it so that it was hooked up to push it through the handheld device. Put a cover on it and let it run to see what would happen. Well, we had E. coli and coliform in it, and after a week, the coliform was gone. After 2 weeks, all the E. coli was gone, and the water that had been scummy and green was now crystal clear. There was no filter in that. It was just vortexing exposure to native EMF.
Right, and when you say there's no filter, what you mean is that normally there are filters. In a typical water filter, there would be filters with tiny micropores, like a reverse osmosis or a charcoal, like a carbon block filter.
It absorbs it.
The water would pass through that. The toxins or chemicals or whatever you're filtering out would get absorbed.
Right.
Or adsorbed, I think the term would be.
Both.
Absorbed and adsorbed.
Yeah.
And then the water is then clean, but the electrical charge of the water has not changed. Or, as a matter of fact, the electrical charge is gone after that.
Well, especially any water that goes through a filter, it's already dead.
Whereas in this case, if I understand properly, you're simply feeding the water through a vortices, through minerals.
Well, no, it was actually it never touched
even
the mineral.
minerals.
Never.
Okay.
It was glass.
Just
glass
like
spheres.
glass beads.
Yeah, a triangular configuration of glass beads. It was vortexing the water, doing a perfect a toroidal spin, left-right spin at the same time, going through this device. So it's just vortexing
you're only
only.
changing the electrical charge of the water.
Well,
nothing else.
we're changing the molecular structure, but we're pulling in ether, which is charged with elements that are in the air, and then I had my harmonizer cartridge in there, which was sealed, but it had all the elements of the periodic table in it, plus a number of other minerals that I
Now,
use.
the harmonizer cartridge, that's what I have in my hot tub in my pool,
right.
and there's one in my refrigerator as well,
Yeah.
and in my travel bag. But what's the harmonizer cartridge?
Okay, well, that emits the light. That emits the native EMF, or the information, whatever you want to call it, the energy. And what happened in that water, that broke down organic matter that I could visually see in the water. It broke it down to an elemental state. After 2 weeks, I drank that water.
Yeah, but the harmonizer, it's not light, isn't it?
Yes,
isn't it
it's
minerals
light.
that's in there?
It's minerals, but they're emitting. The science, this is the science.
Okay, so you're talking about photons.
No, not
emitted by-
photon. Photons are not, there's no such thing as a photon.
Explain this to me.
Okay. Science has not got it right. Okay. The ingredients, when you take it back to the most simple, and I'm a very simple guy, take it back to the most simple, to the beginning. It was water in the beginning. Okay, and I take this from the book of Genesis, but also from philosophers and scientists through the ages who will confirm this. So it's confirmed by being proven, generation after generation. We're just not told about it. But in the beginning, there was water. Okay, what that in the Greek? It's hydrogen. What is hydrogen? It's hydro, water in the beginning. Okay,
Yeah, hydrogen.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so it was water in the beginning. It was and it was dark, void, and still. Okay, so there was no energy. There was nothing there. It was lifeless. No animation, nothing. It was just hydrogen, a sea of hydrogen, and then from that was there, and then the story is that God created light. He created energy. So those are the two components, separate components that create everything. Our reality, our heaven and earth. That is made up of hydrogen gas, which when you take, for instance, you take the hydrogen, if you look on the periodic table, you could deduct it that hydrogen molecule, you take 2 hydrogen molecules, you'll make the next element. You take 4, you make the next. All of the elements on the periodic table are comprised of hydrogen atoms.
Right.
And when you change the configuration, it's like with carbon, diamonds, and graphite. Same element, carbon, nothing else, just carbon. So the chemical structure is the same. What changes so that one is one of the softest materials on Earth and the other one is the hardest? But it's the same thing, carbon. It's just the molecular configuration. It's the same carbon. It's just they change the angulation, the structure of it, and that changes the dynamics of its density, of its of all of its attributes. And that's what happens. It's like, how can you have carbon dioxide in the air, but you can have carbon you can have carbon as a gas or carbon as a solid, And the same thing with water. You can have water not only as a solid, gas and liquid, but it also becomes every single element on the periodic table.
Solid, gas, liquid, and actually in the human body is primarily a gel.
Yeah, but it goes even beyond that, far beyond that. That's mainstream science. What isn't accepted is that the hydrogen atom that's the building block for all matter. That is separate from energy. Energy is light, and that is what animates, what brings action, and our energy. That's what energizes us. So it's the interaction of energy with hydrogen.
So going back to the harmonizer, then how would the harmonizer work based on that explanation?
Okay. Well, what happens, the components that are inside that unit are emitting electromagnetic frequency, which it can call
What is
light.
inside the unit?
It's just minerals.
Okay.
It's just elements.
Right.
Minerals and elements.
Right. So minerals in the same
and
way that
spring
if
water.
you stand barefoot on the ground,
Yes.
you're getting exposed to the electromagnetic frequencies emitted by the giant rock that we live on. You've got all these tiny, tiny, tiny small rocks in the harmonizer,
Right.
along with water, and that's emitting a frequency that is
Many
affecting
frequencies.
whatever the food in the refrigerator that you're placing the harmonizer in, the desktop that you put the harmonizer on, the pool water that you put the harmonizer in. That's how it would
Right.
be working. So you're basically what you're essentially doing in very simplistic terms is you have like a native EMF stick.
Yes, and when that EMF interacts with the water, whatever's in that water, the EMF does. It's doing three things: it's cleaning, feeding, and protecting. So those are the three functions, and each element and each mineral has a different niche. But that's generally, it's like you got two ingredients: light, energy, matter, elements. Those are the two ingredients, and then from there, when those start to interact, you get feeding, cleaning, and protecting. And if you want to even break that down to one word, what you get is love, which is what a mother. What's a mother's love? What's a feeding, cleaning, and protecting? That's mother's love, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's God's love for us. So it's like a chain event. God gives us this love, this physical love through creation. He created this our environment so that we are surrounded by all of these energies that come from Him as a gift to love us. They clean us, they feed us, and they protect us, and they're doing it all the time throughout every single cell in our body.
That's interesting. I never thought. Sometimes I think of my role as a father and a husband is protect, provide, procreate, but I like that idea. Feed, clean,
And protect.
That's
mother.
Yeah.
Why do we call nature Mother Nature?
Yeah.
That's because that's what nature is doing for us.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is the yin. Interesting. The yin of water. So this harmonizer is just one of the things that you have, but I get a lot of questions because most of my clients, when I have them filtering their home,
Yeah.
they're using this whole house structured filter, those that
Right.
just want to filter everything. But that is different. So they get that
Yeah.
from your website, but it's basically, that's a combination of carbon block and structuring, right?
Yeah, and the whole reason why I got into physical filtration products like zeolite and carbon, the different catalytic, bone char, activated, all the basic filters, not the stuff that gets into the iron and manganese and stuff like that. It gets too involved. The whole reason for me getting into physical filtration using cartridges was as a vehicle, like a Trojan horse, by which I could enter into a person's home and begin to introduce them to structured water. That's my whole purpose for it. Because structured water it's without it, we cannot bring water back to its life enhancing state where it
It's the
brings us
most
vitality.
natural state that we find water in
Yeah.
on the planet.
But we can't find it anywhere because if it comes now with dams, it's like if you put
Well,
a
you
dam.
can find it, but you got to like be in a mountain.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Getting
Yeah,
water
well,
straight from a spring.
For the masses, it's
Right.
not attainable.
Yeah.
It's like when they put a dam. You got dams on every single river in the world now. It's like when you put a dam on a river, it's like putting an occlusion on a vein, on an artery going to your arm. And you say, oh, okay, this is going to help. Well, how's it going to help? Your arm's going to start to tingle. It's going to not get the nutrients it needs. It's going to start to atrophy. And that's what we've done to the earth, because the rivers and streams are the lifeblood. It's the blood system for the earth.
Well, it's also the flow, the velocity of the flow. Of
it's
the rivers and
it's
streams.
flowing. But
Yeah.
when we stop that flow or slow that flow or straighten that flow out, where an engineer comes in and says, well, why do you have, with all this wiggly stuff, you're going 2 miles, put a straight line and you make it a mile and we've just solved a problem.
Yeah.
Well, no, we haven't. We've created more problems because that's not working with nature.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the idea behind the structuring is the water would simply, because I have well water, and a lot of people are like, why the hell do you have filters?
Yeah.
And not only does the well water have some manganese and some runoff from fields up above us, but when it passes through my manganese filter, and I also have a bacterial iron-based filter, that water is no longer structured, especially after it sits in the cisterns and goes through the pipes and everything. So the very final stage my water passes through is a structured water filtration unit.
Right.
And from what I understand, your main whole house water filter now that you have on your site is basically a combination of the water passing through carbon block, which gets rid of a lot of these toxins and chemicals. But then after it passes through carbon block, then it passes through structured water.
Yeah, but actually with a lot of these filters, we can structure before or after depending on what the filtration media is.
Right.
And it's gonna go both way. I mean, it can work either way.
But that one is called. Is that your Hydro Z? Is that the whole house water solution?
No, the whole. It's right now. It's the quad flow unit.
Okay, the quad flow unit is the one that has the carbon block.
I've got two. I've got one quad flow that has physical filtration and one that doesn't.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I mean, I've got multiple options.
You've got a few different SKUs on your site. I actually just pulled up your site to look at it. So each of those, if somebody just wants to figure out which one they need based on their water, do they just like contact you on your website and they're able to see which one? And by the way, if you're listening in, don't stop listening right now. This isn't the end of the podcast. I'm just asking this. This is not the part where I tell you to just go buy something. We've still got more coming up here, but I'm just asking this question. So how do people know? Because it looks like you've got 3, 4. You got an undersink, but then you have a whole house. How do people know which of these whole house solutions they need? The multi-round versus the Hydro Z versus the quad flow.
Yeah, well, the multi-round is for city water only. It's not going to deal with well water, and the Hydro Z is good for well water, but it's not the ultimate. With well water you can have a lot of issues, and it's like having having a doctor and having a specialist. I've only chosen to deal with the basic issues because they really need to have a local water treatment specialist if they've got well water with issues, because there could be all kinds of factors. And typically the local water treatment guy, even though he's not into structuring, knows nothing about it, they typically are very well acquainted with the dynamics and the problems with their with these well water. Well water,
but that well water a lot of times needs a customized solution. That's what I had. I had a guy customize the filtration for my water, and then I had him talk to you, and then we structured it after it.
Yeah,
after it gets
and
filtered.
by the way, do you remember when you had put your system in? I came out and treated your aquifer. I poured 10 gallons of spring water mixed with my structured water down your shaft. And we took that, and then I came back, I think, 2 months later and measured. You had 9 parts per million iron before we treated, and afterwards we had 3 parts.
Just by treating the actual well with structured water.
Because what we were doing, we were dropping by changing the viscosity of that water. We were literally precipitated out iron. It dropped out of the.
And then you have the portable one where you could just travel with it, and you would pour water from any source, like let's say a bottle of Pellegrino or whatever you happen to have has been bottled and been sitting and is no longer charged. You would pour it through there. It comes out the other end. You do your glass, and then that's also structured.
Right. And I'm redesigning that handheld now. I'm not selling it right now. I'm doing a complete redesign on it.
You ever have anybody mess around with putting wine or coffee?
Oh,
or something
sure.
Like that
Yeah, I've played around with all that.
What's it do?
Well, some people like it better once it goes through. It definitely changes it. And I've had it where I'm not a connoisseur, but I've had like some come out spicier, some come out with less bitterness. It typically will smooth out coffee and or wine. It'll take out some of that bitterness.
Well, it absolutely changes, because I recently did an Instagram story. I was down in San Diego and I stayed at this retreat that had this gold structured water vortices unit in each room, and that's essentially the same thing. But you pour it in there and it changes. Just you take one glass of water, you pour it through the vortices, have another glass of water on the other end, you drink the water, and anybody who is doubtful right now as you're listening to this, you will know right off the bat. If you take a sip of the regular water, then take a sip of the structured water, it's night and day difference. And it makes a difference, like you noted, in livestock, for example. But, like Robert Slovak and I talked about, you can shower and bathe in structured water. It makes better coffee. Which is, I was talking with Paul Check about that. And, when you pull a shot of espresso, if the water has been structured, it tastes better.
Yeah,
I mean, there's so many benefits to this stuff. And I don't want to turn this into one giant sales spiel, but what I will do is I'll link to my dad's website in the show notes. If you go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/Gary Greenfield, and you can go check out all the options for like the harmonizer, which is the one that produces the native EMF, the portable structured water filter, the whole health solutions. And from the folks I've talked to, saying you're right, you're pretty good at answering questions if people just don't know what kind of setup they want, right? Now, I want to dive back into the big picture here, because you have this idea when it comes to a lot of this stuff, energy, frequencies, water, love, God, This idea of the people of the wood.
Yeah.
The parable of the people of the wood.
Yeah.
What's the parable of the people of the wood?
Oh, years ago, I don't know, it must have been, 2015, 2013, I don't remember when exactly, but I thought, well, I should put an article in our local paper about my business, because I'd never done it, and they always do, they'll do a story on new businesses. And so they did the interview, and a week went by, nothing, another week went by, so finally I called him and said, "What, you guys going to run the story?" And the journalist said, "No, the editor pulled it. He doesn't want it." And I said, "Why?" He says, "It's he doesn't believe, he thinks you're misleading people." And I said, "Well, what about the research? What about the evidence?" And he said he doesn't want to hear it. So I wrote that parable as a picture of what I saw as a problem in the world.
Oh,
at
you
large.
wrote this parable.
Yeah, I wrote the parable.
So what's the parable?
Yeah, well, it's about the people. It was about the people of the valley and the people of the coastal cities who were of the world. They were into money, fame, power, pleasure, all the things of the world. They were into technologies that were based on false principles that were going to destroy them. And the people of the wood, they were connected with their ancestors. They were into tradition. They were into nature. They were into being one with nature, one with God, living a more simple life, based on truth, based on tradition. And that's how I saw it. I saw the world we live in today. It's all based on a false reality. What we're teaching our children in university, from first grade to graduate school, are principles that are false. They're principles that are destroying us as a humankind. You look at all the large corporations that are controlling the agriculture. It's all chemicals. And we're really, and the farmers, they're all dependent on chemicals now. It's like you can't get away from it. They're based on principles that are killing us. Same thing with medicine. Same thing with, history is revision. There's just, it just runs the whole gamut. And so that's why what I'm doing, with water is not, it's hard for people to grasp it because they've just been brain polluted to not accept truth.
So the people of the coastal cities, the people of the villages, the people of technology, they eventually destroyed themselves.
Yeah, and that's what's going to happen.
Due to this lack of love, this malnutrition, this energy that was simply all twisted, whereas the people of the wood thrived, grew on love, became nourished, and lived happily ever after.
Yeah. Simple.
That's a long way to come from a 17-year-old teetotaler in Miami, Florida.
Yeah. Sure is.
Well, I don't know if I've ever fully expressed to you how grateful I am to you for molding me into who I am today. Every step along the way was meant to be. There are mistakes that happen to everyone, but there are no regrets. Everything was meant to be. I think that many of us, especially in this generation, we tend to think back and we blame our parents. We say they could have done something different, or we blame trauma, we blame poor relationships, we blame poor parenting, we blame choices that we wish our parents would have made. But I see so much more clearly, the older I get, that every step from doing the medical billing in your office to working at the ambulance station to, every Saturday having to wake up at the butt crack of dawn to go deliver Meals on Wheels to elderly people with you in your car, to, going to health conferences and, playing my violin at nursing homes. Like all of that, despite at the time, many cases being things I didn't want to do, helped to form me. And took me on this weird zigzag path to where I am today. And again, I never really realized it as much as I do now, but seeing your love for books and learning and exploring and curiosity and knowledge, and seeing your, not only your unconditional love for your family, but also your willingness to defy social norms, to stick it to the man, so to speak, and not care what other people think, but to seek out the truth. I don't think I've ever expressed to you how grateful I am for you being my father.
Wow.
And for you making me what I am today.
Oh, Ben.
So,
thank you.
Thank you, Dad.
Bless you.
And thank you for being on my podcast.
Yeah. Oh, son, I love you so much. And I did the best I could with you, and I'm very proud of what you become. I'm very proud.
Well, I love you too, Dad. And hoping just a few people learned a few things on today's show.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Thanks for coming on.
You bet.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Folks, I'm Ben, along with Gary Greenfield, signing out. All the show notes at bengreenfieldfitness.com/Gary Greenfield. Thanks for listening.
Well, thanks for listening to today's show. You can grab all the show notes, the resources, pretty much everything that I mentioned over at bengreenfieldfitness.com, along with plenty of other goodies from me, including the highly helpful Ben Recommends page, which is a list of pretty much everything that I've ever recommended for hormones, sleep, digestion, fat loss, performance, and plenty more. Please also know that all the links, all the promo codes that I mentioned during this and every episode help to make this podcast happen and to generate income that enables me to keep bringing you this content every single week. So when you listen in, be sure to use the links in the show notes, use the promo codes that I generate, because that helps to float this thing and keep it coming to you each and every week.